Happy Halloween, everybody! Now, this is going to be the last video for October that I'll be doing since, well, October's going to be over soon. But first, a little flashback for you guys. If you recall from last year, I've taken a look at a series called Pet Shop of Horrors. It was admittedly a series that I still enjoy to this day, even if it sucks that we only got 4 episodes. Despite that, I feel pretty bad that this year's series never really made it into a full-fledged anime because there was a lot of potential to make it into this anyways. I mean, think about it. I did say in my Jose list that this may have came out at the wrong time period, but that's probably just because they wanted to get this into the OVA series instead. And like I said before, I feel like there was so much potential they had for an anthology horror series, considering that there was a lot of stories to be written into a full-fledged anime. But we'll sadly probably never see something like that, unless something pops up that I'm not especially aware of. But the time I'm making this video, yeah, we're probably not going to get a full series of Pet Shop Horrors, which is a shame because I feel like there was so much potential they had. But thankfully, we'll be looking at another anthology horror series, and this one has been quite some time on my radar, and I've been hinting it for a while now. So let's talk about Hell Girl. Hell Girl was based on a television series and later into a manga written by Hiroshi Watanabe. The series itself was focused around the shoujo publishers, but it's more in the dark shoujo category. Unfortunately, some people just classify this as something else, but personally, I always want to see some more dark shoujo anime. If you've seen my Vampire Princess BU video from last, the anime was animated by Studio Dean, and for television, it was aired on, instead of Animax, where they usually air a lot of anime stuff, instead it was aired on IFC for some reason, and I'm not so sure if I find that weird because coincidentally when I started watching Hell Girl around 2022, I started watching IFC on television, but I mostly know them for watching Everybody Loves Raymond and some other brands. I didn't expect them to have an anime, but okay. But let's not waste any more time and see if we go straight to hell with Hell Girl or see if the consequences are more than what meets the eye. So let's get started. Every episode of Hell Girl has a basic premise. A victim who is a target of someone who's going after them. Name it, they'll probably do it. Whether it's a bully, someone who stalks them, someone who harasses them, someone who really tortures them for no reason of their fault of their own. Basic stuff that you see a lot of victims for. Unfortunately, our victims seem to have a lot of things on their mind as is. While still doing this for over 400 years, it seems like back then, Hell Girl herself used to do it around, say, before emails were invented. They usually do it in the Hell correspondence, which is basically them messaging who is the main protagonist or heroine for the evening, Hell Girl herself. See, I usually gets messages from either mails or just emails in general, since this is a digital age where you can totally do that. And as you can probably guess, yeah, I is really one of those characters who will do anything to make sure that the person who goes to hell go to get her comeuppance, but there's usually a cost to pay. See, they usually give this here victim a strange doll that looks like a straw doll with a scarlet thread. However, even with that said, there is one thing you can do. You can remove the scarlet thread by just pulling it, just to bring punishment to the person that's already targeting you. And it's really goes as easy as it seems. However, there's a cost. Not only will the victim go to hell right away, but you yourself, the victim, will go straight to hell yourself, but not until you die. So in other words, it's up to you to decide if you want to go to hell with that said target, or if there's anything else you could have done before the thing prevented itself. Either way, they usually get a symbol on their chest. Yes, really. And this here fire symbol patch is usually a sign that they have signed the contract, even though they're really punishing the person that goes straight to hell themselves. But even with that said, it's usually a mark of a deal that you already have made a contract with. Now, when you hear something like that, it does sound like it actually has a double-edged sword to it. I mean, you have a target that's going after you and something, and then all of a sudden you as a victim is so hard to tell where to go from there. Yeah, one thing I didn't mention is that if you ever do go ahead and message I about this stuff, you're basically signing the contract with this here until around midnight. So if you ever do something like this, you have to do it around 12 o'clock at midnight in order to send her the message. And if not, well, it's really not. It's really anything to judge by, but it seems like she won't get the message until then. That's how the first season is anyway, and I'll be absolutely forward with you guys. I've only seen the first season, and I did see a little bit of season 2, but I didn't really catch up with this here show at the same time. Yeah, and I thought Mermaid Melody was giving me a hard time watching the entire series, or something like Jean Major me, but that's still taking a lot longer than it used to, and so is this one. I guess what I'm trying to say is that it really does feel like Hellgirl really knows where to push their buttons, even if they really have to put them straight to hell. But who are these companions, you may ask? Well, all of our companions are mostly just to scare off the target in sight, and I mean they literally scare the target. Like they'll just do whatever supernatural thing they could get their hands on when it's coming to them. Like first off, there's Juan Udo. Oh, at least I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, who's the old guy who has a hat on, and I have to say, he really does it pretty well. Like, he'll usually shapeshift into some things that aren't all of what they are. Then there's also Ren, who, while he has one eye covered, I do like what they do with him and such. While he may be a bit laid back and stuff, he does seem like he's pretty well standard by all things considered, and you do get to see how he does that. It's really no wonder why so many people really find him attractive, even though I'm not one to judge, because while I admit that he does look like a teenager, I'm just gonna keep my mouth shut because I'm not gonna say anything. And then there's also Hone, who I have to say, she's actually quite good at what she does. She usually makes herself into something that looks dead like a skeleton at first glance, but honestly, I do like what they do with her. Again, I've only seen the first season, all of it, so I can't really judge what the rest of this show is like by any stretch of the means, and I've only seen a few episodes of the rest, but Hon also has something that you really don't want to say, that she's old, apparently. Seriously, if you ever do say she's old, she's just gonna hit you with her fan. Oh, slacker. Right there. And honestly, yeah. But there are some other characters we do get to see. We also get this three-eyed spider. Oh, I'm sorry. He's called the Master of Hell. Yeah, despite that, however, he's really always telling I what to do when it comes to taking the people to hell in of itself, though. So you can definitely tell, if you can say for all that, so you thought that I would be the villain, but no. Apparently from what I've seen of it, it seems like the Master of Hell himself is one. A hell spider. No comment? I'm just gonna keep that to myself. But then we get to see Grandma. Yeah, I'm serious. That's really all they call her, just Grandma. Though, admittedly, when I hear her voice, I think of Full Metal Alchemist, and she does have the same voice as her, Granny. And yeah, I have to say, for something like this here character, we don't really see her face at all. And from what I've heard, we don't ever get to see what she looks like, which I actually don't mind that, because it gives a lot more ambiguity than when it meets the eyes. And I have to say, she does act pretty sweet towards her eye, and that's really something I am grateful for. It kind of reminds me of Charlie's Angels. Like, you don't ever see Charlie's face, you just see part of his body, but we don't really see the body of Grandma. We just see the shadow, and that's about it. But despite this being an anthology horror series, we do get to see two other characters that I guess to sometimes meet, but it's not all of what it is. First off, there's Sugumi, the little girl who seems to have visions about I in her past, which I don't know how that works unless she's actually possessing Ai for her own self anyways. And then there's also Hajime, who's Hajime, who actually doesn't get called dad until later on, so I'm not so sure what they're trying to say. I guess they're trying to say that Sugumi doesn't want to say hey, dad right away or father or something like that, because I feel pretty bad because while Sagumi is trying to find out what's going on and why hey, I is sending all these people to hell, the victims included. Meanwhile, Hajime is just trying to do all he can in order to protect not just Segumi, but other victims as well. And you do get to see him trying to figure out as time goes on, and it does feel very mysterious in some ways. But before we get into Ai's character, I think it's only fitting if I talk about what you're really getting into when it comes to this series itself. After all, well, we might as well talk about the big question some people have. The big question a lot of people seem to have with Hellgirl is that a lot of people always ask, would you ever do something like this? Like, say for example, you're the target and then you want to banish someone straight to hell. In the first episode, we see a girl named Mayumi who goes through hell herself because she's been getting bullied, all because she's trying to get all they can get in order to support the girls' school. But unfortunately, she keeps getting bullied constantly from time to time, and she gets physically assaulted from getting hurt on her eye, which really does look painful at times goes on. I will say the first episode, despite being very strong, I will say the pacing itself could use a little work, because it took me a while to watch the first episode, but thankfully they do take their time as the time goes on, so it's not too fast, but it's not too slow if it's anything for its own liking. Or let's say in episode 2, we see a girl named Ryoko who happens to be stalked and harassed by this man who keeps calling her constantly, and she doesn't even want to bother with him, even though he bothers with her. I'm not so sure how old this guy is, but let's just say he does look older than a teenager would be, and he does act pretty creepy towards her. Seriously, if you ever do watch this show, I'd be very warned and advise you try to proceed with caution. Or, I mean, hell, sometimes it can work the other way around. One of the episodes, episode 7 specifically, Cracked Mask, where we meet up with this girl, Ayaka, who happens to want to put punishment on her adopted mother, I assume. And yeah, this is where her things get really topsy-turvy with her, because instead of getting punished for her mother, she's the one who gets punished instead, because she somehow has some vendetta against some girl who was getting this talent instead of her, and it's here where we see her get her own punishment afterwards. Anyway, yeah, I assume if you don't use the scarlet thread right away, someone else is going to use it, and yeah, it's going to backfire tremendously after that, which I have to say, they really come up with a clever way, if I do say so myself. Or how about, say, episode 19, where we get to see this old lady who's telling her daughter not to marry her own groom because of what he's doing, and says calling her a doll because, if anything, I think it's supposed to be a metaphor saying that he's controlling her like a doll or using her like a doll, something like that. And then, wouldn't you know it, she goes to hell, this old lady, and somehow the episode turns out that she was right all along. Now, just because I like something that's ambiguous doesn't mean that it's always gonna leave a lot of people questioning what would happen next, and I think that's really what I have to say. I would go over every episode I have seen in the first season, but if I did that, we'd be here all day, and I don't want to spoil too much for you guys. I mean, I've already covered a few episodes enough as it is, so let's talk about something that I need to discuss. Now, when I first saw this year's show, I did go through a long time to watch this first season. It's back in 2022, and yeah, I don't want to go back to what I have to say millions of times already, what I said about my year of 2022, but the gist of it is, when I was watching Hellgirl, I will say it does seem somewhat episodic, but there are times where they'll dip into something like that. But this isn't the only time I've actually wanted to see Hellgirl for myself. I did see a couple of compilations with Brina Palencia just to see this year's series itself pop up, and wouldn't you know it, I actually wanted to see what was like if I did see it myself, and the results were more than what they are. But I'm not the only one who would cover this year's series. There was another user who would cover this series. The closest thing I can think of is Anime America, because at least Robin, she goes more into detail with it, and I'll leave a link in the description below if you ever want to see how she handled talking about this series, because she does it a lot better than I could. But much like Vampire Princess Miyu, I wouldn't recommend watching this year's series if you're not into something that's episodic or anthology based. I mean, seriously, I don't know what it is with people not liking anthology horror series every once in a while, but I'm guessing they're more of a story driven series people than I say that. But guess what? I don't mind anthology horror series every now and then. I mean, hell, I enjoyed something like, say, The Twilight Zone or something on the lines of Treehouse of Horror, maybe something like regular shows, and those had anthology horror shows every now and then. But even with that said, however, I still feel like there were some things I could have easily done, though. But unfortunately, we need to get into Ai's backstory before we stick any further. So, spoilers ahead, I guess, but you decide whether or not you want to watch the series. So, let's get on to it. For all intents and purposes, it seems like I had some kind of mystery about why she's always bringing these people to hell, and she's been doing it for over 400 years. Now, if it were over 666 years, I think we might call it even. Anyways, it seems like I has some sort of backstory of why she does this. It turns out that when she was young, she was already hated enough by people from the citizens that she used to live in, along with her own best friend. But unfortunately, things didn't turn out well because they think that she was really born as a hell devil and such. So much so that the people mobbed against her and so much and so forth, and to the point where they actually buried her alive, which I have to say is pretty heartbreaking and it's hard to watch. I mean, if you ever do end up watching her backstory around episode 24 or 25, yeah, that's where shit gets really pumped out anyways. Now, while this series is dark, I didn't think they would go that far, but I should have expected that considering it is called Hell Girl for some reason, not to be confused with Hellboy, although they have an episode dedicated to something like that. Not the hero that Mike Mignola made, just a different Hellboy. Missed opportunity though. But I will say, when it comes right down to it, yeah, I herself has already went through hell enough, and you can totally tell that they really didn't hold back any punches, and it's pretty hard to stomach what went on with Ai's life, especially at the time. But I will say, even in spite of all that, I still feel like Hellgirl didn't really give me to say, oh, it's a bad series, but it's far from being a great series to me in some regard. I guess it's only fitting if I say that this is one of those series that lasted for 4 seasons. In the first season and the second season, which is called Two Mirrors, third season called Three Vessels, and fourth one called The Fourth Twilight. I think it's only fitting if I say that this is one of the longer anthology horror shows out there, and yet sometimes someone's out there is going to say it overstays its welcome. But why is that? After all, it isn't a Thor anthology series for what it's worth. Shouldn't they at least try to like it for what it's worth? But I can't really bring myself to hating that idea because, like I said, this was basically a made for television from Studio Dean, so they pretty much wanted to make something made for a series in mind. And while I wasn't around when it first came out on IFC because I didn't have that network back then, I still don't think the show itself, while it was already around when it came, and it was, let's say, the network was already having Hellgirl of itself, I didn't really stick around to see it because I didn't know about it until years ago, around the 2020s era. And even with that said, I still feel pretty bad for Hellgirl of itself because a lot of people just think that this show is all bad because of that. I don't want to say it's bad because of all the things they have here, but someone in the comments somewhere on the website says, Reddit, that they always say, oh, it's really hard to watch and this is really a bad series in its own. Which says to me is saying that, oh, it's really A, it's episodic, so we couldn't really get into something that episodic, or B, maybe it's because it's really just one of those shows that won't hit well with everybody, and I can agree with the latter. Look, I'm not saying Hellgirl is a bad series. Like the last series I've covered on my Magical Girl podcast, even though this is not a Magical Girl series, this is more like, say, an anti-Magical Girl series, I feel like Hellgirl is one of those shows that really would stick well with an audience if it's anything of their own. Honestly, I'm surprised that a lot of people stick around to watching it, but I'm kind of surprised that a lot of people would at least skip this over if they don't want to watch anything hell related. But let me ask you guys the question: would you want to do something like this? I mean, seriously, would you want to use this red scarlet thread for your own? If anything, I will leave that comment in the and stuff after this video's done, but I don't really have that much to say other than Hellgirl is a fascinating watch. I will say that Ai reminds me of a young Yuko Ichihara from Holic, but even with that said, I still would recommend into Hellgirl if you're really into something spooky this time of year. Now, with that said, I'm going to be taking a week off so I can get to the next Magical Girl podcast. But until then, I thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you all next time. And as always, happy Halloween and stay Flamingo-tastic. See you all around.